Good evening, and welcome to our town hall on the COVID-19 vaccine. And thank you for joining us this evening. There's a lot of information that we want to share with you, and we know you have a lot of questions. You'll have a chance to ask questions using the Q&A feature at the bottom of the Zoom screen. I'm Mary Lanham, your moderator for this evening. We're fortunate here at the University of Miami to have a truly renowned group of medical leaders to guide us through this historic process. They are here to answer your questions so you know what steps to take and what lies ahead. I'm proud to introduce our esteemed panel, starting with University of Miami President, Dr. Julio Frank, Chief Operating Officer, Dr. Dipin Parekh, COVID-19 Chief Medical Officer and the Chair of the Department of Medicine, Dr. Roy Weiss, Dr. Suzanne DeBlecki-Lewis, the Medical Lead for the Vaccine Task Force and Infectious Disease Physician, Dr. Tanira Ferreira, Chief Medical Officer of the University of Miami Hospital and Clinics, Dr. Bhavarth Shukla, Medical Director of Infection Control and Employee Health and Infectious Disease Specialist, and finally, Kathy Stella, the Operations Lead of the Vaccine Task Force. We have a lot to cover this evening, so let's get started. It's my pleasure to introduce University of Miami President, Dr. Julio Frank. Dr. Frank?
Thank you, Mary, and thank you all for being here and joining us on this very first town hall meeting on vaccines. First of all, I am delighted to have the opportunity to personally thank all the health professionals and workers for the valiant work that they are engaged in on behalf of our patients and of our community. In a year marked by unprecedented challenges, the team here at UHealth has personified the spirit of service that is so central to the university's mission. You know, yesterday I issued my last video message of the calendar year, and I was remembering how at the beginning of the academic year, back in the summer, having already gone through the initial spring spike of cases of COVID-19, I said then that we were at the end of the beginning. Today, with the arrival of vaccines, we can say that we are at the beginning of the end of the pandemic. And it is truly a feat of public health. But public health relies on a combination of scientific research, clinical care, and the general population's willingness to practice civic responsibility. And your work at UHealth has been part of the tip of the spear on each of these fronts. And I want to say that I couldn't be more proud or grateful for the sacrifices and the example that the professionals and the staff at UHealth have set for all of us. Now, vaccination is perhaps the most powerful tool in the public health arsenal. It relies on that combination of factors I was mentioning. Vaccination has a long history as the most reliable, safe, and effective way of protecting people against harmful infectious diseases. So we come to this new stage, this game-changing stage of the pandemic, of the management of the pandemic with a long, long history of experience with vaccines that have been the main contributor to the amazing lengthening of life expectancy across the globe. And we come to this particular set of vaccines against the coronavirus with years and years of research, of fundamental research. A lot of people think that the development of the vaccine has been very fast, and it has. The brightest aspect of this pandemic has been the unprecedented level of collaboration among scientists in academia, in government, in private industry across the world with this mission of developing safe and effective vaccines. But behind each vaccine are decades of fundamental research, the type of research we carry out at UHealth. So we bring all of that experience, all of that rich legacy around vaccination to this new challenge that we are facing, what is probably going to be the largest vaccination campaign in the history of the United States, and I dare say in the history of the world. And we will adopt a phased approach for vaccination that started today with our frontline employees, healthcare employees, those employees who either directly take care or work in an area with patients who have tested positive for the coronavirus. Then we will follow with a number of phases where the distribution of the vaccine, the access to the vaccine, will be inspired by a principle of protecting the most vulnerable first, those who really we need to quickly and in the shortest possible time protect from the dire consequences of this very serious disease. The next speakers in the town hall will explain in much greater detail what is the nature of this series of phases where we will follow both federal and state level guidelines. But now, exactly to share more details about our approach to vaccination here at UHealth, it is my pleasure to introduce someone whose expertise has been an integral part of our adaptive and responsive strategy against COVID-19, our Chief Operating Officer, Dr. Dipen Parekh.
Thank you, President Frank, for joining us today and for your leadership through this unprecedented time. Having someone with your vast experience in public health has put our university at the forefront and has carried us through an uncertain period. I also want to thank all of our thousands of UHealth employees and the support staff who have worked tirelessly over the last 9 months, who coping with the very real threat of this virus, dealing with the unknown, facing numerous challenges head on, always with our patients at the top of mind. You have set the standard of excellence when we needed you most, and you continue to do that every single day. You have my humble gratitude for that and much more. Here with us today is also our interim CEO, Mr. Joe Echevarria. After taking the helm, Joe, you have expressed unwavering support for our mission at every turn, and we are grateful for your guidance, your leadership, and your mentorship during this very difficult and challenging period. This is the first in a series of town halls to address your questions. Today, we will focus specifically on the medical campus because our frontline workers are the first to receive the COVID-19 vaccine. Later today, just a few minutes before this town hall, we received our first allocation and started giving out the vaccine to our frontline healthcare providers and staff. This is the start of what will be a months-long process, but is the beginning of a new chapter, as President Frank pointed out, a beginning of the end of the virus. Months ago, knowing that eventually we would reach this day, our emergency management team and many others began planning on how we would give a vaccine safely in the middle of the pandemic. The amount of planning and support needed is staggering and is yet another example of the dedication of everyone here at UHealth. My thanks and admiration go out to all members of the team. Because this is such a large undertaking, we ask for your patience. Everyone at UHealth, regardless of their role, will receive a vaccine, and ultimately, so will their spouses. We are following state and federal guidelines and will receive more allocations of the vaccine as it's manufactured. Tonight, we will answer as many of your questions as possible, and we'll continue to do that as we move forward. Now I'd like to turn it over to my esteemed colleague and partner, Dr. Roy Weiss, the chair of our Department of Medicine, but more importantly, the CMO for the entire campus for our COVID efforts. If there's one person who has transcended a human effort, it's almost a superhuman effort, that's Dr. Weiss, who has been doing this for many months with a smile on his face and kindness in his heart. Roy, please take over. Roy, you're on mute. Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Parekh, and thank you everyone for being here tonight. I've only done this 1,000 times and still don't know a mute. But it really, the credit goes to all of us who have functioned truly as a family and who has really stepped up to the plate with resiliency and energy and dedication and loyalty to our mission of taking care of our patients and taking care of the health of our community. Today is indeed a historic day Make it a note of this. December 15th, 2020 at 3:15 p.m., Jackson Memorial Hospital, our partner, delivered the first set of vaccines, about 90 for today, we have begun administering. With the permission of these individuals shown in these pictures, I give you an example of who were our first individuals to get injected with the vaccine. Kamar Estes, the director of nursing in the ER. Anthony Adesonio, director of food services. Antonio Garcia, a patient experience screener. Ivan D'Souza, a manager in security. Asi Alfonso, director of environmental services. Veronica Valdez, environmental services, and Joseph Felice, the nurse manager in our COVID-19 unit and cardiovascular ICU. These are the heroes. These are the people that came to work every day since March, taking care of the sickest of our sick patients, making sure that we're all protected. And now we get the opportunity to protect them. Today truly is a historic event. But why do we need a vaccine? Why do we not just have medicines that can treat this? Well, it's very important to appreciate why vaccinations, as Dr. Frank alluded to, is so important, specifically for the SARS-CoV-2 virus, which causes COVID-19. This is a highly transmissible disease by the respiratory route and can be very easily very serious. And it can be transmitted by both people that have symptoms, but more importantly, by people who might not even know they have symptoms, that is being asymptomatic or pre-symptomatic. It can become an endemic infection, meaning that it reaches a steady state. In this situation, the so-called community or herd immunity is unlikely unless we're able to vaccinate 70% of the population. So without the vaccination, there is no such thing as herd immunity. And I don't need to tell you the major economic and human impact that this disease has had on our society and the world. Let me get this straight. You've eaten hot dogs your entire life, but you won't take a COVID vaccine because you're not sure what's in it. Let me demystify this for you. Let me tell you what the vaccine is really all about. Now, I know there's almost 1,000 people on this call, and I apologize in advance if I'm being too pedantic for some, or if I'm being too simplistic for others, or too complicated. But just so that we're all sort of on the same basis, because the history here is not just the speed at which this vaccine was obtained, but this is the first vaccine that is an RNA vaccine. And what does that mean? What you see at the top of the screen is a little blue ball. This is what we call a nanoparticle. It's a very thin ball made of fats, made of lipids. And located within this little Christmas tree ball-like structure is a tiny strand of RNA, messenger RNA. Messenger RNA is the blueprint for all the proteins that are manufactured in life. So what happens is that this specific messenger RNA, encased in this little ball of lipids, this nanoparticle, gets injected into the body. This nanoparticle fuses with the cell membranes of our cells, and then the messenger RNA, this blueprint, is released into the cytoplasm. If you remember that term, that's where the proteins are made by the RNA. And this protein that's being made is the viral spike peptide. This is a unique protein that is only present on the SARS-CoV-2, on the COVID-19 virus. This protein is then made all of a sudden in the body because of the vaccine that's been given. And the immune system, all the cells in the body that respond to foreign substances say, hey, guys, listen, there's a foreign substance in our body and we need to make antibodies to fight against it. And we need to build up our immune system to fight against it. So it's sort of like a boxer getting ready to fight before the match. They've been primed. They know who the enemy is, the virus is, and then bing, the virus comes and the body is all ready to neutralize it and to destroy the virus, because the antibodies recognize that unique protein on the surface of the virus. This is totally safe. This protein does not affect the body in any way. The RNA does not affect your genes or anything like that. It just utilizes the machinery in your cell to make the antigen which is necessary to stimulate the immune system. Now, there are two messenger RNA viruses that are under FDA review. The first one is the Pfizer vaccine, and this was approved on December 2nd in the United Kingdom. And what we've read about was approved by our Federal Drug Administration on December 10th with the granting of what's called an EUA, Emergency Use Authorization. And then it was, once this EUA was approved around December 12th, the federal government, who had already pre-purchased these vaccines in the hope that the data would prove that it would be efficacious and safe, was then free to distribute these vaccines to the states. Each state of the union would get their vaccines and then distribute it according to the regulations that they set. Now, the other vaccine that's about a week behind the Pfizer vaccine is the Moderna vaccine. And we anticipate a similar decision being made about this vaccine, which is the same concept of a messenger RNA messenger RNA vaccine around December 17th, which will double, if you will, the number of vaccines that will become available to our population. And there's a third and a fourth and many more vaccines that will be coming down the line over the ensuing months. There isn't much difference between the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccine, except the Pfizer vaccine, the second injection, the booster injection, is given 21 days after the first. And in the Moderna vaccine, it's given 28 days after the first dose. You can't get a Pfizer vaccine on the first dose and a Moderna vaccine on the second dose. That we don't mix, but we will be getting at UHealth both Pfizer and Moderna. Right now we have the Pfizer. And because these are under what we call emergency use authorization, it's voluntary. Now, what do we know about the safety of the vaccine? We know that there have been 44,000 participants worldwide throughout the United States, Europe, Turkey, South Africa, South America, all of whom were 12 years and older. Of those 44,000, 21,700 received at least one dose of the vaccine, and 21,700 received the placebo. And they didn't know which one they got. That was the only way in which we could determine whether or not the vaccine was any different from salt water, both in terms of its safety and its efficacy. It was tried almost on an equal amount of males and females, and you can see the racial distribution of individuals who volunteered for the trials for the Pfizer vaccine on the lower right of the slide. What do we know about the safety of the vaccine? Well, most of the adverse reactions, if you will, or problems with the vaccine were very mild to what they say is moderate, and they resolved in a few days. It's not surprising that there was pain at the injection site. That's momentarily. Anytime you take a needle and stick it in your arm, there's going to be a minute of pain. So that the FDA has to, or the company has to report that to the FDA. But this usually goes away after a day or two. Then there's fatigue, headache, myalgia, chills, arthralgia, and fever. And we do recognize the fact that some of you may experience some of these side effects. And it may be possible after getting a vaccination that you might not be able to come to work the next day. And so for that reason, as we plan to roll out and we give the vaccine to our workforce, we want to be sure that not everybody from the emergency room shows up at the same day for the vaccine, because the next day, if some of them have some issues, they may not want to come to work that day, and we would need to evaluate that. So we want to be sure that we have a continual workforce. How do we know that it's efficacious? How do we know that it's worked? Well, in all those thousands of cases, they had 8 confirmed cases of COVID-19 in the vaccine group, compared to 162 confirmed cases of COVID-19 in the placebo or the saltwater group. The efficacy from 7 days after the second dose was reported to be 95.5%. And the might be a slight difference in the efficacy when you look at age, whether it's over 65 or over 75. Now compare this to the flu vaccine. This is much more efficacious in treating the flu, the COVID-19 than the flu vaccine is in treating the flu. And it's important to note that there was no meaningful clinical differences in the overall vaccine efficacy, whether you had 1 or 2 or more comorbidities. Age, obesity, diabetes, hypertension is equally effective in everybody. When does this vaccine start working, and how long does it last? Well, last Friday in the New England Journal of Medicine, the results of a phase 1 Moderna study was published as a letter. And in that article, or in that letter, it showed us the first glimpse as to how quickly and effective these vaccines are. This table just illustrates 2 of the parameters used to measure the efficacy of the vaccine. In the first panel, you see it's called RBD ELISA. What that means is a spike protein receptor binding domain analysis. And it's divided into 3 age groups: the 18 to 55, 55 to 56 to 70, and then greater than 71 years of age. And you can see at the bottom on the x-axis where day 1 was, day 15, and then the second arrow is when a week after the second injection. And you can see that in the RBD ELISA, the titers of antibodies that fight the virus go up even after the first dose, but remain elevated for many days after the second dose. And it seems to be the same no matter what the age group is. Another measure, and there were 4 or 5 measures reported in that paper, is the pseudovirus neutralization assay, which may not be as tight in terms of the age, in terms of how long it lasts. But it's a combination of all these antibodies that tell us that this is efficacious. We don't know how long it's going to be efficacious for after the second booster. Will it last a year? Will it last 2 years? And that's one of the reasons why when we give the vaccine, you will be required to report to the state government any side effects that you have. We'll be monitoring you closely as to whether or not you get COVID-19, and then they will have additional data for the FDA to decide whether or not to take this out of an EUA and make this permanently approved. So while the vaccine is likely to start stimulating antibodies soon after injection, we don't know when the antibodies will be fully protective, and we don't know how long they will last. Therefore, I plead with you, please, to continue, even if you get the vaccine now, please wear a mask, maintain physical distancing, and practice good hand hygiene, because this is not a panacea until we have 70% of the community affected. Yes, you'll be protected, but we need to protect the community at large as well. So please be mindful of that. And now comes our schema for the prioritization timeline of the vaccine. You'll see at the top of this slide the various phases defined by either the federal government or the state government, different phases, and we've interpreted that for you into the various phases that we see at UHealth. Now, in the first week, we will be getting 3,000 doses. That is enough to treat 3,000 people. It's just for the first injection. And we anticipate, as Dr. Parekh said, each week to get more of the vaccine. Everyone is guaranteed to get a vaccine at some point, and anyone who gets the Pfizer vaccine now is guaranteed to get the second dose at 21 days or thereabouts. So we have to follow the state guidelines as to who can get the vaccine. This is kept like Fort Knox. This is gold. The governor wanted to send the National Guard to deliver these things, but I think people have dissuaded him from deploying them for this purpose. And as I said, the asset has arrived. It's here at the University of Miami, and we've already started injecting. We anticipate in phase 1, you'll see outlined in orange what we call the UHealth employees, the health community, and in green, those that are on the Gables campus, just in order as a straw dog to be able to see where you might fit in the different phases. Now, remember, we don't know how the dates are very, very fluid here. We don't know exactly when and how many we're going to get. And we also don't know how many people will want to get the vaccine. I urge you all to get it. If there's any questions that you have, you should discuss them with your medical provider. But I urge you to get the vaccine. In the first group, it's any essential personnel that are involved in clinical support areas, and our people on the Gables campus that are in the student health services and seeing COVID positive students and do the testing for the positive students. In the second group, and how quickly we move from phase 1 to phase 2 depends on the number of individuals that want to take the virus, right? They gave a survey, and it's not much different from the national. About 50% probably will not want to take the virus, at least at this vaccine at this point, until they see their peers get it and know that they're healthy. But I urge you all to get it to protect yourselves, your families, and the community. And then in the second phase are our medical students who are on rotations, the procedural staff. All our residents, house staff, and fellows will be getting the vaccine, and they already started today as well at the Jackson location, Jackson North. And then we have phase 3. You can see the individuals that are in each one of these phases. Now, we'll post this timeline on a website so that you're able to identify where you might fit in the phases. And we will be notifying everyone when their time is up, if they want to opt in to get the vaccine. We'll also be sending notices to all our patients to let them know when the vaccine arrives. We'll invite them to come and get the vaccination. And so, but the final point I want to make is that a vaccine will only work if you take it. So please, I encourage you to do so. Thank you. At this point, I'd like to introduce my co-leaders in this, Dr. Suzanne Doblecki-Lewis, who is a professor of medicine and a world's leading expert in vaccines, and herself was one of the first principal investigators of the Moderna vaccine trial here at the University of Miami, who has a wealth of information about vaccines and infectious diseases, and Catherine Stella, who's our Assistant Vice President for Ambulatory Operations and the head of the operational aspects of this vaccine rollout. So at this point, Catherine, I'll ask you to continue the presentation while I recover.
Thanks, Dr. Weiss, and good evening, everyone. So as we continue to prepare for the vaccine, what do you need to do to be able to be communicated so that when your phase is activated, you will be ready? The first step is to log into Workday and indicate whether or not you want to take the vaccine. For the medical students, we are still working through the process on how to best have them opt in, but that's the first step, opting in. Once you opt in, you will be added to a link that will go ahead and activate a UChart message so that you will be able to self-schedule. it provides all of the information, gives you options on what time and date that you can come in. So it is really important to opt in as that starts the process. Once the process has started, you really should be able to schedule yourself, but you need to make sure to coordinate that with your manager, because we need to make sure that our operations are maintained and there's appropriate coverage. So then, as I stated, once you opt in, you are led through a process when your phase is activated to be able to schedule your appointment. It is all automated, and you do need to schedule. You will be able to answer the appropriate screening questions, complete your consent form, schedule your time and date, and be able to be ready to receive the vaccine. So where are we currently doing it? Currently, we are at the white tent at the west side of the West Building, and you can see it here in this diagram. Currently, we're open Monday through Saturday from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. And once you arrive, the entire process will take 30 minutes. However, we are opening additional sites so that we can meet all of the needs of the community as the phases get rolled out. And we are also going to be adjusting the hours as needed so that we can accommodate all of you. So what do you need to do to plan for your appointment? You need to make sure that when you do show for your appointment, you can present with your driver's license and your smartphone. You will then receive the vaccine. After you receive the vaccine, you will wait for 15 minutes. And then from there, while you wait, you will be prompted to schedule your booster. So that is the process. Now, to give additional details on the vaccine, I'd like to turn this over to Dr. Deblecki Lewis, who will share additional details.
Thanks, Kathy. So we had, I know looking at the chat, there are many questions, and hopefully we'll get to address some of those medical questions or contraindication questions as part of the discussion after this. We chose just a few topics that are frequently asked to address right now. So first of all, what about people who are nursing or who are pregnant who may be at high risk for COVID and who are included in the emergency use authorization? So the FDA and the CDC's advisory committee recommended that pregnant people who are in the high risk groups and fall under the EUA may choose to be vaccinated. This is because we know that pregnant people are at higher risk for severe COVID disease if they become infected. And because experts believe that the way that the mRNA vaccines work, they're unlikely to pose a risk to people who are pregnant. These are not live vaccines. They cannot cause infection. And the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology is also in agreement that this is unlikely to cause a risk to the pregnant person or to a developing fetus. So if a pregnant woman is considering vaccination, a conversation with their healthcare team may be helpful in making that decision. And there are some other points of information around, using Tylenol for fever and side effects and that kind of thing that should be discussed before, but it's not contraindicated during pregnancy. Likewise, during lactation and breastfeeding, there's no data to suggest that there would be a risk to a breastfeeding infant. And again, women who are at high risk due to their occupation of acquiring COVID may consider taking the COVID vaccine. And these are the recommendations. So what if you took part in a COVID trial? Well, first of all, thank you. We are here today talking about this because of our participants in the COVID trials. And as a person who was deeply involved in the COVID vaccine trials, I know that we have a lot of faculty, staff who have been engaged, and that's great. We don't want people to receive more than 2 doses of any active vaccine, and recognizing that several trials are still in the blinded phase, it's important that someone who's in a trial consult with their trial site to find out the best plan for them. For instance, for the Moderna trial, and Moderna's vaccine is being reviewed this week, there is a request to the FDA to unblind and vaccinate the placebo arms, but that hasn't happened yet. So someone who wants to receive vaccine under the EUA would have to place a request for special unblinding prior to that unblinding, and that would have to be done through the study site. So please do consult with your study sites before you consider taking a vaccine outside of the trial for safety reasons. And what if you had COVID-19? So there were included in the clinical trials people who did have COVID-19 who were positive by serology. So we know that they did encounter it before. There were no safety issues around that. And it is recommended that people who have fully recovered from COVID-19 may take vaccine and probably should take vaccine. However, they don't need to do it in the first 3 months after infection because reinfections in that period are very unlikely. And so we recommend waiting 3 months before taking it in order to give others a chance to take the vaccine during these early days when it's in scarce supply. So thanks, and I hope I'll get to answer more questions later.
And with that, I'd like to turn it back to Mary so that we can get into some questions.
Great, thank you all. And thank you to all the presenters. That was really great information. We are receiving many, many questions, as you can imagine, through the Q&A. We're gonna dive right in. For those watching, please remember you can send a question through the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. And those that we won't answer, we will post our frequently asked questions and answers on the UMed Insider. We'll tell you a little bit more about that as we move forward. Dr. Deblecki-Lewis, we're going to come back to you. We're getting many questions about children. Will children be able to receive the vaccine?
Right. I know we're all looking forward to the day when our kids can be vaccinated. So in the trials so far, only people down to the age of 16 have been included. And so the current authorization is for people 16 and older. We don't have any authorization for children 15 or younger. The Pfizer vaccine trial did add on participants down to age 12, and they are looking at that data and continuing to follow those children from 12 to 15. So we may have data for that age range probably sometime in the first or second quarter of next year. For younger children, younger than 12, it will take more time. There are trials planned for both the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines, but those are not underway yet. So it will be a matter of months before we're close to having an answer for children.
Great, thank you. Dr. Weiss, this one's coming to you. How much will the vaccine cost? Will there be a charge for receiving the vaccine? You're on mute.
Well, in general, there's no such thing as a free lunch. But in this case, it is, in the sense that the government is already prepaid for all these vaccines and are sending them to the states without charge. As long as it remains as an EUA, there will be no charge to the states for it. There is, however, of course, there is a significant cost incurred for the setup and the operations and the actual injection and monitoring people after they get the injection, but those are all covered by UHealth at this time. So right now, there is no charge for the vaccine, but likely as the vaccine gets full approval by the FDA, there will be a charge placed on it.
Great, thank you. We'll keep everybody posted on that as we go. President Frank, I'm coming to you on this one. Why is the flu shot mandatory for our employees, but the COVID vaccine is not?
Well, the flu vaccine has been around for a long time. The effectiveness is very well proven. As Dr. Burke and Dr. Weiss explained, the COVID vaccine is, although the data is extremely encouraging, but it is being authorized under emergency use. And so long as it's an emergency use authorization, it cannot be mandatory. Our hope is also that as more and more people receive the vaccine and we reassure anyone who has any doubt that this is a very safe and effective vaccine, more and more people will use it voluntarily until we reach that threshold of 70% when we will be able to achieve herd immunity. So the reason is that difference, that this is under emergency use and it cannot be made mandatory. And probably, if everything goes well, it will not have to be mandatory. It will just happen as a matter of protection. People will take very little time to realize that the risk of not taking the vaccine and getting sick with COVID is much, much higher than the very minor side effects that have been documented to date.
Great, thank you. Dr. Ferreira, we're coming to you on this one. If Jackson has the vaccine and I work at Jackson, should I get my vaccine there?
Good evening, Mary and everyone. Here's the deal. You should get the shot where primarily you work. If you primarily work at Jackson, that's where you should register. If you primarily work at UM, that's where you should register. But we do ask that wherever you register, you should have your second shot at the same location. And no faculty will be denied a vaccine. So this is a historical day. We're extremely happy. Please sign on. Mary, back to you.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much. Dr. Dublecki-Lewis, we're going to come back to you. And this was discussed in the presentation a little, but we're getting a lot of questions about, will I need to get this every year? Is this an annual vaccine? Any additional information you can share on that?
Right, I wish I had that information. As we all know, we're less than a year into this pandemic altogether. So like everything else, we're learning as we go. This is one of the reasons why it will be important that we do continue to follow people in the clinical trials, even after everyone has received a vaccine, so that we can continue to monitor to see how long these vaccines do last and whether booster shots might be needed in the future, for example. Right now, we know that things look good for at least 3 months, probably quite a bit longer than that. But more to come. I think we're hopeful that they'll have some durability, but exactly how long they'll last, we really just don't know yet.
Thank you. There are some things we don't know yet, and we're going to learn along the way. Dr. Shukla, coming in your direction with a question. We know that we have the Pfizer vaccine here with us today. We expect to get the Moderna vaccine if that receives approval. When they're both available, or even more than one, can I choose or can we choose which vaccine we would like to receive?
So that's an excellent question. Several people have asked me that one already, actually. Today is really just the first day. We only have the one vaccine, and a lot of how we planned and have been rolling out the vaccine is based on guidance from the CDC and the state. And I think once we have another brand, which will probably be next because it's getting reviewed right now, then it'll come out with also its own guidance with regards to restrictions and so forth. And depending on that, we'll be able to gauge whether or not people can choose. Certainly, I think ultimately, once there's numerous vaccines out, just as with flu and others, we'll have the opportunity to choose. But right now, since we're in the very early phases, it's really hard to gauge how soon that would be the case.
Great, thank you for that. Kathy Stella, this one's for you. How will I know which phase of distribution I'm in? We sort of saw the schema that Dr. Weiss showed, and we'll be posting that on the UMed Insider for those. But how will I know exactly what phase I'm in? And if I believe I'm at high risk, how do I declare that?
Well, it's difficult to say exactly when certain phases will be rolled out. It's very fluid, but I would say that referring to the UMed Insider, where you can see all of the information, including that diagram that Dr. Weiss shared, is a first start. But then we do communicate to those who have opted in or out, but those that have opted in. So I would say that's probably the best place to start, opting in, so that when the phase that's appropriate for you is activated, we can go ahead and make that communication. And if there are any questions regarding that, you should really go to the email for it, which is the UM COVID vaccine info at miami.edu, and that can be a good place to get some details on whether or not you have questions or feel that you didn't understand the phase.
Great, thank you. And we'll be posting that email to you shortly at the end of the town hall so that you can capture that and other ways to communicate with the leaders here. Dr. Weiss, this one's for you. Will the FDA continue to test the vaccines to give full approval or re-examine the safety and efficacy over the long term?
The answer is absolutely yes. The FDA is obligated during the phase of the EUA, the Emergency Use Authorization, to continue to gather data to assess both safety and efficacy. The infrastructure for informatics that exists within the FDA and within the state of Florida is such that it will be able to provide real-time data in terms of side effects and individuals that come down with new infections and so forth during the course of during the months following the vaccination until it achieves full FDA approval. And even then, there's processes within the FDA that continue to monitor safety and efficacy, as with all our medications that are approved.
Great, thank you. And stay with me here. I have another one coming your way. What happens if we don't achieve 70% of the population getting vaccinated? What if we don't ever get to that number?
Don't tell me that. We're going to get it. No, what happens is that if we don't get to 70%, we run the risk, and this is 70% of a population. It doesn't mean 70% of the entire necessarily the United States. It means maybe 70% of the community in which you live. What that does is that it lessens the likelihood of herd immunity and from being able to eradicate the disease. When we look at the history of the efficacy of vaccinations, we look at how polio was totally taken care of, and measles for the most part, and smallpox. These are examples of successes where the vaccination, because of large mass required vaccinations, resulted in essentially eradication of the disease. And so the world isn't going to come to an end, but the likelihood of herd immunity, if less than 70% of the population gets the vaccine, is problematic.
Great, thank you for that. And I hope you're right. I hope we don't get there. Dr. Shukla and Dr. Deblecki-Lewis, I'll send these both, this one both your way. How do we differentiate between side effects of the vaccine or what might be a COVID infection? How will I know if I have a side effect, or how do I know if I might be experiencing COVID-19?
Dr. Deblecki, you can start if you want.
Okay. Sure. I think that's a great question because if you look at the list of side effects, it does overlap a bit, right? So headache, low-grade fever, malaise, myalgias, like body aches. These are things that happen with COVID and also can happen in the first couple of days after receiving the vaccine. I think a key difference is that the vaccine does not cause respiratory symptoms. Again, this is not a live virus. It can't cause actual COVID infection. It cannot cause respiratory, it does not cause respiratory symptoms as part of that first couple of days of symptoms. So if you have cough, if you have shortness of breath, even, runny nose, sore throat, those are not things that happen after the vaccination because of reaction and immune reaction to the vaccine, which is really a positive thing because your body is making a good immune response. And also duration, right? So we expect that the vaccine reacto symptoms, as we call them, usually go away within a couple of days. So if you're having persistent symptoms after that time, especially if it is also involves respiratory symptoms, that would be a concern that you had become infected with COVID, unfortunately, before you got the vaccine and maybe developing symptoms of that. So those would be two key things. And, remembering that people who are receiving the vaccine now are at high risk for COVID. So it is important to kind of keep an eye on things and make sure that any symptoms you have do make sense for what's described after getting the vaccine.
I would only add that our 1U hotline is still running. So if there's any questions about that, and you've had an exposure that you know of right before the vaccine, you're concerned you have prolonged symptoms, we certainly provide testing to that effect.
Great. Thank you both. Sometimes before we get our flu shot, we take some Motrin or something to help maybe with the soreness in the arm or maybe feeling a little run down after. Do you recommend taking over-the-counter medicines before getting the COVID vaccine? And I'll open that to Dr. Shukla or Dr. Weiss.
Lavarth, handle that one.
Sure. So yeah, I mean, absolutely. If you're feeling symptoms, I mean, the recommendation is really you don't need to pre-medicate. In other words, you don't need to take medications before the vaccine. But after the fact, if you're feeling some fevers or malaise, weakness, what have you, yes, you absolutely can take over-counter Tylenol or ibuprofen. Of course, based on your own medical history, if your doctor has told you not to take those for other reasons, you certainly should consult your doctor. But yes, otherwise you can certainly take those to help with symptoms.
Great, thank you. This one's for maybe Dr. Weiss, Dr. Deblecki-Lewis. We're getting a lot of questions about, we're using the terms high risk here when we're talking. What makes someone high risk and sort of moves them into the category, into those earlier phases?
So there's two, when we speak of high risk, we have to understand whether we're talking about high risk for the COVID disease or whether we're talking about high risk for the vaccine and effectiveness of the vaccine. When it comes to the COVID-19 disease, it's been pretty clear that there are certain predisposing medical illnesses that bode poorly. Older age, obesity, diabetes, other what we call comorbidities, that is, conditions or diseases that would make you more likely to have a more severe infection with COVID disease. Those individuals that are at that high risk or immunosuppressed in that way are individuals that would be considered high risk for COVID-19 and individuals who we would prefer to be immunized so that they don't come down with the COVID-19. But I think it's very wise that what we're doing first is taking care of our frontline employees. And I just want to stress that because we are about and in the middle of another surge of COVID-19 in our country. And if we don't have the healthcare workers available to take care of us when we get ill, we will be in a very bad situation. So it's very important that as we look at prioritization, we really do start with the first line healthcare workers, not because they deserve it, they do. I mean, they work hard and they put their lives at risk, but they're the ones in a selfish way that are taking care of the rest of us when we get ill. And if they're not available, if they're come down with COVID-19, those are the individuals that we have to take care of. And you should also know that the state released vaccines for the elderly in nursing homes and the caregivers there. That was not a political reason, at least I don't believe so. I believe there's real medical reasons for that population to be inoculated because they are the ones that could spread the disease in the community, not because they're out of the nursing home and walking around, but because of the way in which the virus can get moved around. Then there's the issue of high risk. Are you at high risk for getting the vaccine itself? And that I'll turn over to Dr. Deblecki-Lewis to answer.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, so high risk for getting severe COVID. Certainly, we know well those folks, and we know that age is a large factor here, as are particular comorbidities. So I think that with the emergency use authorization, really there's some attempts to look both at people who are at high risk for getting COVID in the first place, like frontline healthcare workers, and at the most vulnerable people who are at highest risk for progression to severe disease and death. And that's why the emergency use authorization was really for healthcare workers and also for people in long-term care facilities and group home care facilities, because we know that those are groups, people who have a particularly high risk for getting very sick and dying. So both are important to address. And I think this is one of the challenges, is to know which order to do things, to really try to address both people who are at high risk of getting it and people who are at high risk of progressing to severe disease.
But in terms of risk of getting the vaccine itself, individuals who have allergies to particular components of the vaccine or who have had allergic reactions to other vaccines must discuss with their healthcare provider whether it's in their best interest to get the COVID vaccine. So that's what I meant by the second group of
sorry, sorry, I misunderstood. Yes, and I think, the allergy piece, sorry, Mary, if I can just speak to that for 1 second, because I know there's a lot of questions around allergies. And, it was very well publicized that after the vaccine was rolled out in the UK, there were 2 people who had severe allergies and anaphylaxis to other things before and who did develop severe allergic reactions to this vaccine. So there's been a lot of exploration around that. But right now, the recommendations are quite clear that this is a very narrow group of people who should not receive the vaccine because of allergies. In general, would be people who have had severe allergic reactions or anaphylaxis to the particular vaccine components, and we can get a list of those to you if you're concerned this might be you. Not to people who have food allergies, allergies to bee stings or venoms or other things. And for those people, there may be a little more precaution if they are severe reactions in terms of watching for a little bit longer at the site. And certainly, it's important to discuss with your healthcare provider if there's any doubt. But there is an effort to make sure that people know that for those who have less severe allergies, environmental allergies, food allergies, there's no reason to avoid getting this vaccine.
Great, thank you. I know it's 6 o'clock here, but I'm just gonna, because we started a little late as we were waiting for people to log on, I'm just gonna go through a few more because we're really having great dialogue here with a lot of questions. I think, Dr. Weiss, I'll come to you with these. There's sort of 2 I'm gonna lump together here that I think are easy. We've had questions. If I'm a part-time employee, will I get the vaccine? And will my spouse, I think we mentioned this, but will my spouse or those in my household be able to receive the vaccine?
So yes, as a part-time worker, if you're considered in a high-risk area, that is an area that would come in contact with the COVID virus, yes, as a part-time worker, you would be invited to get the vaccine, absolutely. We are, our intention is to offer this at some point to spouses of our employees. However, that is in a later phase when we know when we have sufficient vaccines available to immunize the workforce. So in terms of prioritization, they're definitely on the list, but where they fit on the list will depend on the rate at which we receive supplies of vaccines.
Great, thank you. Dr. Deblecki-Lewis, I'm going to send 2 your way here. One, if I get the vaccine and then I get COVID, is it true that the symptoms are less severe? Let's just start with that one.
Right. So from the clinical trial data that we have so far, it does look like, for sure the Moderna vaccine data that was released today showed 0 severe COVID infections and 94% effectiveness in less severe cases. So it looks like these vaccines do protect, it's likely that they do protect against severe disease. So yes, in the chance that people do get COVID, even after getting the vaccine, it's highly likely that that would be a much less severe case of COVID. So it does seem that these vaccines save lives due to cases of severe COVID.
Great, okay. And then one final question, and then we'll let people know how to reach everyone and some final details. Dr. Deblecki-Lewis, back to you. If I see that there's the EUA was issued for the vaccine, and maybe I'm thinking I'm going to wait for full FDA approval. What's your comment there? Is there a big difference between the EUA and then full FDA approval?
That's a good question. You know, for some, because there are so many cases of COVID in the United States right now, the trials are progressing very quickly through their primary endpoint, meaning the endpoint that was originally intended to be what they would submit to the FDA for approval. There are also some, there's also some longer term data desired for full approval. So that will take a little bit of time. So I don't have a date in mind for a full approval for any of these vaccines. I don't know that that's known. But you know, I think that really it's important to look at risk and benefit right now. So we do have a fairly large amount of information to suggest that there are no significant severe side effects in the first 3 months of use of these vaccines among a pretty large number of people. And we know that COVID is taking lives every single day. So, you know, I think every person makes their own decision, but to me, it's very clear that the vaccine is much safer than getting COVID.
Great, thank you so much. So we have many questions still coming in, but we're at the end of our time. We will be posting these questions and these answers on the UMed Insider for you to go and read. I want to thank all of the panelists tonight for answering all of our questions and sharing this really important information. We know that information is changing and we're learning as we go, and we really appreciate your expertise as we launch on this journey. You can see here ways to reach us. You can an email umcovidvaccineinfo@miami.edu. You can see the hotline there that we've been using since the beginning of the pandemic. And then on the intranet, as I mentioned, umedinsider.miami.edu. We did receive a lot of questions about that I think I should be in the first phase, and I didn't receive communication about that. So feel free to reach out with these forums so that we can look into that for you. Again, in closing, thank you all so very much. Thank you to the frontline teams for all that they're doing, and we wish you all a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.